with me to 2 Kings chapter 6. We're going to go back old time. And our topic this morning is Desperate Times Call for what? Question mark. What did desperate times call for? Now, Desperate measures. That's often how we complete that, isn't it? Desperate times call for desperate measures. Now, what does that mean, though, when we make such a statement, when you hear such a statement? Basically, we're saying that when times get desperate, when times get tough, when times get beyond any place you think you've ever been before in some experience in life, you will suddenly become willing to do something you were never willing to do before to compensate for that. Probably the best illustration I can think of that comes to my mind is this TV show. I think it comes on National Geographic. It's been on for several years, called Man vs. Wild. Have you ever seen that? It's got this guy, Bear Grylls is his name. And the premise is they take him and dump him in some remote location, just a tough environment, and he's got to get out of it. All right, they just helicopter him in, drop him in with a camera crew, and he'll typically have nothing but maybe a knife. He might have some string on occasion or some other, but he'll have 2 or 3 items, and that's it. No food, no water, nothing. And he's got to fend for himself, not only find his way out of this environment, but take care of himself while he's there. And so again, the show is trying to show us is that if you found yourself suddenly in the Amazon, which I can't conceive who's in that situation. I don't see myself ever being just in the Amazon all by myself in the middle of it, but maybe it could happen. But the idea is if you find yourself that way in such a quote, and for me, let me tell you what, that would be a desperate situation. I don't want to be too far from the nearest McDonald's, right? So now if I'm out here in this remote area, how am I going to fend for myself? I've never been a Boy Scout, haven't been in the military. I would be pretty much helpless, I think. But I do have this catalog of Man vs. Wild programs that I've watched. And so based on that, I've learned that you can eat some incredibly disgusting things and survive. How many of you seen this show? Anybody? Okay, several of you have. For you that you know what I'm talking about, don't you? For you that haven't, did you know, for example, that there's all kind of insects that you can actually eat? And typically what we learn is that you need to eat the head first because it'll be crawling in your mouth if you don't. I don't know, that's just disgusting to me. But maybe if I were in that situation, I would do it. Bear Grylls does it. He also eats all kinds of bark, leaves. I can't tell you some of the things from animal product that he eats, all right? But it's some nasty stuff that I just can't see going there. But yet, people will take desperate measures during desperate times. Would you agree with that? And we can see that. And in fact, maybe some of you have been through times of desperation. I don't mean like Bear Grylls, but we all have times that we get ourselves in situations where maybe it's a marital. We're desperate in our marriages. Maybe it's some medical condition that we find ourselves that we're desperate in that. Certainly in the economy that we have right now, there's many people who find themselves in tremendously desperate situations. And as it becomes more desperate, they may be willing to take desperate measures to get out of that. But I think I can tell you at least 3 things that typically happen when we find ourselves in desperate measures. First of all, once we realize how bad the situation is, we begin to have pity on who? Self-pity. That's the first one. You know, you'll hear things like, why would this happen to me? I can't believe this. In fact, it's interesting that you'll often hear people in a desperate situation when they're talking about why did it happen to me, they will actually wonder why it didn't happen to so-and-so. You know, have you ever heard that? I'm a better person than my neighbor. You look how bad they are. Why did they deserve this? I didn't deserve it. I shouldn't be going through this. So we work through this self-pity, this whole concept of self-pity, and then we move to blaming others. That's why I'm in this situation. I need to realize it wasn't me that caused this. Somebody else caused this. So I start looking for my scapegoat. Who am I going to blame? Who's caused this situation? And then we move into the third level where I'll call it where we lose hope or lose faith, or it's just outright despair. And if we get to that level, what we do next is going to be key. Because for some people who reach the level of despair, that's just where they reside. They just live in despair, and they never come out of it. They won't receive any encouragement. But there are others, though, who will at that point begin to assess the situation and to take action. In our story today, that's what we're going to see happen. We're going to find some people in Samaria who were in a desperate situation, and we'll see some elements of self-pity here. We'll see some blame cast upon others. We'll see some utter despair and loss of hope. But then we're going to see what happens when God takes you through desperate times and what the end result looks like. Well, let's pick up our story here in 2 Kings. Now, the background of this story is that you have Elijah the prophet who is doing much of his ministry in what was known as the northern kingdom. The nation of Israel had been divided into two kingdoms. In the north, Israel, and the south was Judah. And you had basically good kings in Judah and bad kings ruling in Israel. And so Elijah is going to go through a few of those kings. And they'll have good times and bad times. But they had some problems with this group, these Arameans. And so we pick up our story here in chapter 6 and verse 24. It says, sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. Now, they had just been having peace with Ben, and suddenly, I don't know what, Ben just decides he's going to invade the city. So he does. And he comes up there, he lays siege to the city, and it says there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long. He was there so long that they were running out of food. They couldn't get outside the walled city. Now, fortunately, Ben-Hadad couldn't get in with his army, but they couldn't get out to resupply. So they're literally going without food inside. It lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. Now, that's a lot of money. A donkey head, when it says that it sold for 80 shekels, that's kind of like putting a bunch of silver in a bucket. All right? I mean, there's a lot. And don't you just love that ancient delicacy donkey head? You have that regularly, don't you? No. No. Well, let me tell you, I haven't seen Bear Grylls eat a donkey head, but I've seen him eat some stuff like a donkey head, all right? Desperate times call for desperate measures. And so can you imagine being the owner of that donkey head in those days? That'd be a pretty good boon for you, wouldn't it? I should only hope that I had a whole bunch of donkeys at the time. But what does it really tell you? What had happened to the rest of that donkey? It's gone. They had eaten everything. All that was left was the head. And so if you went in the streets of Samaria in that day and looked for the delicacy of the day, guess what it was? Donkey head. And I get the impression people would love to have had a donkey head, don't you? If it sold for that much money.